10 days of public mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and on Monday, September 19th, with a full day of funeral proceedings, which began in London and ends in Windsor, where Her Majesty is laid to rest. Queen Elizabeth II's funeral at Westminster Abbey is attended by world leaders. For Algeria, Prime Minister Ayman bin Abdurrahman is representing President Abdelmajid Tebboune in the funeral. World leaders, including notably President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, and representatives from across the Commonwealth of Nations, most of which were part of the former British Empire. They are all attending, and the guests convened for the ceremony at 11 a.m. London time, which culminated in 2 minutes of silence for the Queen across the UK, and the playing of God Save the King, a change after 70 years of God Save the Queen. Processions through the streets of London, and then the royal residence at Windsor is also taking place until Queen Elizabeth is laid to rest. In the evening at St. George's Chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle. Monday is a holiday across the UK, with many businesses and schools closed, so citizens can watch broadcasts of the events, which started at 4 a.m. and extends past 7:30 p.m. Globally, millions are viewing the coverage of the ceremony at Westminster Abbey, where Elizabeth married Prince Philip and had her coronation. This is the first funeral for a British monarch to take place at the Abbey since the 18th century, and the first time cameras are allowed inside any funeral ceremony for a British monarch.
هذه الجنازة نحو 500 من زعماء العالم. شاهدنا وصول الرئيس الأمريكي جو بايدن.
Hello and welcome to this special coverage on the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. And before we delve into any discussion, let's follow this portrait, that of Queen Elizabeth II.
Her longevity had become legendary. Queen Elizabeth II, known to favor simplicity in life, was extremely witty and clever, but she was also famous for her temper, something she inherited from both her father and her mother.
I think she's played very well exactly the role of a constitutional monarch. She's not got involved in politics. We barely know her. I mean, she's the most charismatic, sort of photographed, most famous woman in the world, but she's also very enigmatic. We hardly know her. And I think being able to stay above politics but seen as relevant and respected has been really important.
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary first saw light in 1926 as the first child of the then Duke and Duchess of York. Nicknamed Lilibet, she enjoyed the first decade of her life with all the privileges of being a royal without the pressures of being the heir apparent.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Elizabeth wasn't born to become a queen, yet that was her destiny. She was 25 years old when Elizabeth learned she had become queen in February 1952, while she was on a trip to Kenya.
I think something that interested me when I was researching this book was the extent to which it was made clear to the Queen that there was a strong expectation that she would follow in family footsteps.
In 1947, Elizabeth married Prince Philip, a distant cousin. A few months later, the first of their 4 children, Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, was born. At the time of her wedding, Great Britain was still recovering from the ravages of World War II, while family life provided the biggest shocks. In 1992, her daughter Anne divorced her husband Mark Phillips. Charles split from Diana, and Andrew separated from Sarah Ferguson. After Diana's death in 1997, the Queen initially rejected the idea that Charles would marry his long-term mistress Camilla Parker Bowles.
a key part of the Queen's approach to sovereignty has been this determination to live up to the role, to do it as well as she can be. And therefore it seems to be inconceivable that we would ever hear the Queen saying, well, I'll do it my way. And that thought doesn't appear to have occurred to her.
During her record-breaking reign, Elizabeth kept a symbolic but no less important role. She ruled the largest kingdom on the planet and reigned over 130 million subjects. With this last historic smile for a queen who reached her 10th decade and reigned for 72 years, Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain became the longest reigning monarch in British history.
Joining us in our discussion today, experts from UK. We have Professor Marshall Staub, Professor of Medieval History, University of Sheffield. Also, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, political analyst and former Royal Palace correspondent. And later on, we will be talking to Professor Richard Toy, Professor of Modern History at Exeter University and formerly Cambridge. Gentlemen, Madam, thank you for agreeing to be with us. And let me start with you, Professor Staub. What are your thoughts about the Queen's life and her legacy? What are your personal memories of the Queen? Seems that we don't have Professor Staub. Can you hear me? Professor Staub, if you couldn't hear my question, I could simply repeat. I was simply asking you about your thoughts about the Queen's life and legacy, and what are your personal memories of the Queen? Mr. Professor Staub? Professor Marshall Staub?
Yes.
Yes, if you could just share with us your thoughts about the Queen's life and her legacy, and what are your personal memories of the Queen?
I don't have much personal memories beyond what has been on display, not just in this country, but worldwide. The reason why I got, of course, interested in the funeral is, first of all, I live in the UK, and obviously it is the central event happening at the moment, but also as a historian, because there is definitely a historical dimension to what is happening, not just in the sense we use historical nowadays to say something which is very relevant to our time. I think it is in many respects, but also because it is inspired by, let's put it that way, it is inspired by the past, and this is what got me very interested in what is happening in front of us.
Very nice indeed. And what symbolism did Queen Elizabeth have in Britain during 7 decades of rule? I mean, that's really a long reign.
Well, if you talk to people who, most people basically in the UK, have not known any other monarch than her, or they might just be, deeply aware of the fact that her father was the king during the Second World War. But you have to go back that long to find someone with memories, and someone who wasn't a child at that stage, but someone who had memories of another monarch. So to a certain extent, she was not just a monarch; she was the monarchy. And I think this is part of what we are witnessing at the moment. I mean, the deep sense of mourning in the country. I'm not sure it is something which everybody will feel that way, but there certainly is a sense that an epoch is going to coming to an end, and that's something you realize very quickly when you talk to people of particularly many different generations, because even the younger, who might not have the same sense of, let's say, the longevity by definition, will tell you, well, I haven't known any other monarch than her, so she is a little bit part of my world. And that's very often the way people put it.
Very nice indeed. And Dr. Yvonne Ridley, if you can hear me, can you give me your answer regarding your own memories of the Queen and the personal impression that you had from Her Majesty And we see that now in mainstream media, everyone is portraying Her Majesty as a legacy and an iconic image that actually represents Great Britain. So what are your own thoughts and memories of the Queen, Dr. Yvonne Ridley?
Well, she was an incredible woman who deserved universal respect for her loyalty and sense of duty, which, you know, she worked right until the end. 2 days before her death, she said farewell to the outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson and was introduced to the new Prime Minister, inviting Liz Truss to form her government. So there is a great sense of loss, but I suspect that the crowds that are watching today, there will be those who are genuinely in mourning. There will be others who feel as though they're taking part in a historic pageant and feel the hands of history on their shoulders. And there will be others who are watching the whole spectacle because it is interesting. This is nobody has seen this, the like of it, for more than 70 years.
Indeed. And what symbolism did Queen Elizabeth have in Britain, Dr. Yvonne Ridley? Dr. Yvonne Ridley, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I missed that.
Yes, I was asking about the great symbolism that Queen Elizabeth had in Great Britain during all these 7 decades of rule.
Well, the Elizabethan age has seen the transfer of a great colonial power to a much more reduced, modest country than when she first became queen. The country itself has changed in content. It's more diverse, more multicultural.
But in achieving that, what major obstacles and difficulty do you think she faced during her reign?
Well, shortly before she became monarch, of course, she saw the pain and destruction of the Second World War. And in fact, you know, she was in uniform herself and helped in a small part. So the military is very important, or played an important role in her life. But I think that the importance of the monarchy has reduced now, and I think what we're witnessing now is not only the death of a queen, but the demise of the British monarchy. You know, when Elizabeth came to power, there were more than 100 royal families in the whole of the world. Now there are less than 50. People are beginning to wonder if the days of royalty are now becoming less relevant.
Very nice indeed. And what about you, Professor Marshall Schaub? How do you describe the impact of her death in the UK and worldwide, as we see all mainstream media actually is putting her funeral on the limelight?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because you might say, well, she is obviously the head of state of the UK and 14 other countries in the world. She's the head of the Commonwealth. So you might understand basically that there is a political relation between the people living in those parts of the world and Queen Elizabeth II. But of course, there is a sense of I would say participation in mourning, grief, which goes beyond, which is to do with a lot of phenomena which are even beyond her reach. I'd say British soft power, is one certainly factor which you have to take into account. Another one is we have had a series of worldwide funerals with huge audiences. I just mind, as a historian, basically, I like to remind people of that because it's always important to contextualize. But in 2005, the funeral of Pope Jean Paul II basically was a dimension which had not existed before for an institution which, like the British monarchy, is obviously a very old institution. And then in something in a kind of a different, at a different level, 2013, the funeral of Nelson Mandela was much more to do with his charismatic role as a person, because when we're talking about John Paul II and the Queen, I'm not saying that there is no personal charisma which is involved, but of course there is an institutional side of that charisma to talk in terms of Max Weber. And then we have also to look more globally and see what happens in similar situation where you have monarchies and sense of mourning. And I think 2016 is a very good example of that. The death of the King of Thailand, Bhumipol. There was 1 year of mourning, mind you, and he was laying on state, and I think 12 million people in a country the size of the UK came to pay respect or tribute to his legacy. So there is, if you like, a global phenomenon. There is something which is to do as well with, let's say, the importance of, I would say, Britain in modern and contemporary history. There is no doubt about that. And I think beyond that, if I may, there is a personal element which is due to her sheer longevity. I mean, for many people, and not just in the UK, I just mentioned the UK and the Commonwealth, but for many people, England or the UK would have been associated with her in the first place for as long as I can think back. And I think that's something which we have to remember. And then something which Dr. Ridley said, which is important possibly, there is a reflection on duty, which goes beyond, if you like, the constitutional role she played in the UK and in the Commonwealth. It's something people can want to and take example from.
Very nice indeed. And here, joining us live just now is Professor Richard Toy from Exeter University and formerly Cambridge University. And I would like to redirect this question, or just perhaps paraphrase the same question, since we're talking about Her Majesty's symbolism, standing as an icon and attracting people from all over the world, and her impact, or the impact of her death, not only in the UK, but also worldwide, was quite remarkable. What is your comment about that? Yes, Professor Richard? Can you hear me, Professor Richard? All right, perhaps I can just talk to Dr. Yvonne for the moment till we fix the technical problem that we are facing, unfortunately. The traditions of the royal family, Dr. Yvonne, family go back nearly 1,000 years. Despite modernity, we see the kingdom manage somehow to maintain the same protocols. How did it withstand for so long, according to you, Dr. Yvonne?
Well, the British monarchy has had quite a turbulent millennium. You're right, it has been around in some existence for more than 1,000 years. And in fact, some of the pageantry that we are seeing today in this funeral is a legacy to that long history. But times are changing. We're into a new millennium. And I think that the Elizabethan age, now that it has drawn to an end, will give rise to another chapter, which may not see the likes of her reign again. I do feel that Ireland, as it's drawing more to becoming a united Ireland, and Scotland is after independence and is planning to vote on that next year, and Wales, with its growing independence movement. I think that the United Kingdom is not as strong as it was. And I think this is something that the Queen was very acutely aware of, and she was the glue that held the United Kingdom together. And I think that now that she has gone and we have King Charles III, he is going to have a very difficult job in replacing his mother. And I think that he realized that, which is why he has already visited in his capacity as king Wales, Scotland, Ireland, as well as England.
Very nice indeed. And I would like to get back to you, Professor Marshall Staub, since you are actually specialized in those ceremonies. How do you think these ceremonies actually could last for so many years?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right that there is a long history to these ceremonies, because I heard very different things about these ceremonies and lying in state, for instance, even on BBC of all channels, which were accurate and at the same time a little bit, I think, misleading. Of course, the lying of state, as we experienced it for many days and people queuing to see the monarch lying in state, in that form, basically goes back to Edward VII in 1910. So you might say it's a 112-year-old tradition. But of course, as a medievalist, I know well that medieval kings and queens were lying in state, and it was common, and it was the case as well in England. And indeed, you can say that in the late Middle Ages, so let's say in the 1300s, 1400s, and even the beginning of the 1600s, a lot was codified, which had existed before. But we have these sources still nowadays, and these sources in particular have informed the liturgy of the Royal Chapel. So you can say, to an extent, there are differences as well. I mean, you would have expected in the Middle Ages at some stage a horse to enter Westminster Abbey, mind you. But there are differences, but they are very, very subtle. I mean, the main difference is obviously the Reformation, which means that when it comes to the funeral mass, or the funeral service, as it were, it is no longer a mass. It is not a requiem mass. But you can recognize, when you are medievalist or Catholic, you can recognize all the elements of the Catholic funeral rite, except that the Eucharist has been taken out. But all the other elements, I mean, there is a clear continuity there, which goes back to a source material and tradition and practices which have been around. Now, there is another element, I think, which we should be aware of, is the fact that you have medieval, let's say, element or origins to the rite does not mean that this is medieval. Yes. The way the people relate to the monarchy, I also heard a lot about that and say, well, the sacrosanct of the monarchy, etc. I don't think, I mean, by any shape and form, people relate to the monarchy in the way people in the past related to it. It's a very different way. The monarchy had to reinvent itself. Indeed, it had to be restored in the first place. People tend to forget that during 12 years, basically, the monarchy was abolished in England, and so tradition is something you have to cultivate. And we can say, for instance, that in the Victorian age, and in the late 19th century, there is a conscious effort which we made basically to stress the traditional side of the monarchy.
Very nice indeed.
And that's something which we have around there. Right.
Yes, very nice indeed. And Dr. Yvonne, you with me?
I can hear you.
Yes, Dr. Yvonne, it just strikes so many people. I mean, talking about these traditions and pageantry and all those costumes, it's quite actually pleasant and beautiful to see. Nobody actually knew that there were these kind of costumes hidden somewhere, and all of a sudden when there is this occasion and we see all these colors and so on, and of course it attracts a lot of tourists who came for the funeral only for that. How do you find this, let's say, lavish funeral amidst this crisis that the British citizens are witnessing?
Well, this is, you know, against all this amazing pageantry and crown jewels and diamonds and a very extravagant and elaborate service. There is a very dark underbelly and a backdrop because people in Britain are facing extreme hardship. There is fuel poverty on the horizon. Just yesterday, I was at a meeting where we were told that mothers are having to sacrifice their own food so that their children can eat because of these looming energy prices and bills that are due to arrive before the end of this year. So maybe the funeral is a bit of a distraction for some, but for others, you know, their minds are focused on day-to-day living. So seeing this extravagant show of grieving is jarring to some people. You know, this is not a nation in mourning. There are pockets of dissent. There are people who have protested, but we're living in an age at the moment in Britain where any dissent is smothered immediately. Any jeering or boos is being airbrushed or erased from recordings, and the censorship is quite extraordinary.
That's quite interesting.
There is actually, you know, while there is huge respect or was huge respect for the Queen, people are more concerned about the day-to-day problems that they're facing with very real poverty and hardship on the horizon.
And yet again, Dr. Yvonne, I mean, this is what the British people are known for. And, you know, British history is really rich. And for all of our, for all the people around the world, this is what you are known for as British. I mean, and I guess having a monarchy, a former imperial power, has a price, apparently.
Well, Britain was also known for its car industry, its shipbuilding, its steel making, its coal industry. You know, times have changed, and the pageantry is still there, and the pageantry will continue with or without a royal family. You know, one of the biggest tourist attractions in France is the Palace of Versailles. Well, they haven't had a royal family for quite a long time.
Yes,
so, as I say, I think that we're on the cusp of quite a change in Britain.
Very nice indeed. And here our own Mariam Zian is joining us to explain the new challenges and duties of the new king, King Charles.
Thank you, Karim. Hello, dear viewers, and welcome to my segment. Charles was made Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester by his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, when he was a child. Charles III began his duties back in 1969 when he was invested as Prince of Wales at Carnarvon Castle. From then on, he was opening hospitals, touring the Commonwealth, and delivering speeches about the state of the planet. Even while still an undergraduate student at the University of Cambridge, he was expected to represent the Queen overseas, visiting Australia and Japan. By then, he had already absorbed that royal life comes with both great privilege but also duties. As the years advance, advanced, the Queen increasingly turned to her son and other members of the royal family to represent her at home and overseas. King Charles is also a patron and member of hundreds of charities. The King founded the youth charity, the Prince's Trust, in 1976. He is patron, president, and a member of over 400 charities and organizations. As the Prince of Wales, he also became known as a passionate campaigner and driver for action on climate change and environmental issues. Just last year, he held a major presence at the COP26 Global Climate Summit in Glasgow, where he urged world leaders to work together to save the planet. In pursuing some of his interests, the Prince gives support to organizations in the worlds of art, music, and theaters. Over the years, he has taken part in many different sports, including racing, scuba diving, and sailing. The moment Elizabeth II died, her eldest child, Charles, automatically became monarch. As sovereign, he has chosen to take the name King Charles III. All rights and responsibilities of the crown now rest with King Charles III. Charles III will be the head of state for the UK and 14 countries, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. He will become head of the 56th Commonwealth. After his succession to the role was agreed by the Commonwealth leaders at a meeting in London in 2018. He has become head of the British Armed Forces, the judiciary, and the civil service, and he is the supreme governor of the Church of England. He is the fount of honor, which means all honors, such as knighthoods, that will now be given in his name. All the official royal residencies, including Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, will now be under his control. There are also other residencies, such as Balmoral in Scotland and Sandringham in Norfolk, which the Queen owned privately. Charles III became the King of the United Kingdom on September 8, 2022, having spent almost all of his 73 years preparing for his role, watching the example of his mother, Elizabeth II. Yet he faces an uncertain course as monarch. Charles will have to make new choices about what it means to be a modern monarch. Elizabeth's death may serve as an opportunity for nations to re-examine their relationship with the British monarchy once the mourning period ends. In late 2021, Barbados removed Elizabeth as queen and became a republic. Right after, in early 2022, Prince William and Kate Middleton were met with protesters when they visited the Caribbean, calling for reparations from the UK over their role in the transatlantic slave trade. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the Caribbean have all previously demonstrated their republican appetites. The 2014 Scottish referendum favoured remaining as part of the UK and under monarchical rule by just 55% to 45%. This slim margin and the many changes that have occurred in the past 8 years have provoked Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, to call for another referendum. It isn't just the relationship with countries of the former British Empire that has changed over the 7 decades of Elizabeth's rule. The monarchy under Charles will need to adapt to social, political, and generational upheaval. In Britain itself, the UK is made up of almost 70 million people in 4 deeply divided nations. They are divided by class, generation, geography, and economics. Charles also faces questions about his political neutrality. Elizabeth was careful not to reveal her political beliefs or personal beliefs. She was simultaneously the most public and most private of individuals in Britain during her reign. But Charles has a different public reputation. He has been outspoken in controversies about architecture, farming, health, and the environment. In being less discreet than his mother about his political views, Charles risks compromising his constitutional role as a monarch who reigns but does not rule. Perhaps the biggest challenge for the newly anointed monarch will be whether he will truly be able to leave the passions of his previous life behind. And more than anything in the 21st century, King Charles will have to bring a new approach to the practice of wearing a crown. Charles will have to make new choices about what it means to be a modern monarch. His tenure on the throne will be defined by how he responds to the new tensions in the relationship between sovereign nations and people. As Britain is mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II, critics of the monarchy took the chance to protest, holding signs such as "Not my king" as a reference to the new king. Police have intervened and arrested protesters in some cases, raising serious questions about the way in which some forces are cracking down on dissent in the country. Today, some see that King Charles III may be the last British royal, and that the British monarchy has grown increasingly detached from everyday life in Britain and is terribly expensive to maintain. So, what's next in the UK's new era? Only time shall tell. Over to you, Karim.
Thank you, and that was Mariam Zian telling us about the challenges of King Charles III. And here we are joined by Professor Pippa Catterell of History and Policy from the University of Westminster. Thank you for joining us, Professor. And my question to you here, when she was first crowned, Queen Elizabeth II was seen as a symbol of hope. At a time the British Empire was crumbling. Can we say the same thing about King Charles III, especially at this difficult moment in the history of the monarchy? As many are saying, King Charles III could be the last British monarch. What's the future of the British monarchy? Apparently, Professor Pippa is not here, but we have Dr. Yvonne. Dr. Yvonne, did you hear my question, or should I ask?
Yes, it's an excellent question, and something that as yet the British media have yet to ask. We're being fed very different style of coverage in Britain than the rest of the world. But there is a huge question mark over the monarchy. The Commonwealth is much reduced now. More countries have expressed an interest in no longer having the a head of state from the royal family. These are questions that have been asked now in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and some of the Caribbean countries. Charles is going to have quite a challenging role from the transition, from the Elizabethan age to this new age. And in some ways, it's a shame because nobody has served an apprenticeship as long as Prince Charles did. Now he's king, but he had at least 50 years in training, in waiting to take the role. He is, I think, going to have a very independent style. And be quite different in some ways to his mother. He's always been progressive. For instance, in the 1970s, he looked around the Royal Guard and said, "Why do we see no black faces? Where are people of colour in service?" And this is something that he identified very early on. As I say, this was in the 70s. By the 80s, he was immersed in environmentalist views when it took the rest of the world considerably longer to catch up. So he is progressive. He is dynamic, but of course, as monarch, he's not supposed to become politically embroiled. So it is going to be an interesting time. And in the meantime, as I say, the glue, which was Queen Elizabeth, kept the United Kingdom together, is fragmenting now. It's almost certain that we are soon, maybe in the next 10 years, going to see a united Ireland and an independent Scotland. So I think that the people of Scotland and Ireland and Wales, to a certain extent, can expect to be love-bombed by King Charles, who will try and persuade the people that they still need a monarchy. And that is one tough job.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Yvonne, and thank you so much, Dr. Staub, Marshall Staub, for all these thorough analysis. We will have a comeback just right after the news. Stay tuned to our channel, and bye for now.